Hello and welcome to episode 93 of the Dragons Are Real podcast. It's Kickstarter Wednesday, that's right. Every Wednesday I look at the newest Kickstarters coming on the crowdfunding platform and anything that's ending within the next 7 days. So let's kick off. These are what I've got for you today and see if there's something that tickles your interest. So first up is Iron Sworn Starforged. This is the sci-fi evolution of the award-winning tabletop role-playing game. In Iron Sworn Starforged, you are a spaceborne adventurer sworn to undertake perilous quests. You will explore uncharted sectors, unravel the secrets of a mysterious galaxy, and build bonds with those you meet in your travels. Most importantly, you will swear iron vows and see them fulfilled, no matter the cost. For those who aren't aware, Iron Sworn is a sci-fi tabletop role-playing game that was released some years ago. This is a standalone. It is powered by the Apocalypse game and can be used for solo, co-op and guided play. It has some great solo mechanics for those who want to play on yourself, but then you can also adapt it for multiplayer as well. And it has a good oracle system for decision making. So that is Iron Sworn Starforged. I'm sure this one is going to be pretty big. Next up, we have Change Stars, a sci-fi tabletop role-playing game. In an interplanetary future, the Trinity has emerged from the ashes of a long-dead empire to bring hope. It's set in a bright yet perilous future, inspired by utopian feminist science fiction and contemporary gritty speculative futures. You explore a non-humanocentric future full of immersive culture and diversity in this unique, realistic yet colourful setting that's alien without alienating anyone at the table. It uses a unique D system and will facilitate every kind of adventure you can imagine in the Change Stars universe. You add together the total of your skill and stat to form the basic test, rolling and looking for sixes. Only a single six is necessary to achieve success, but multiple sixes may be used to twist. So the setting for this goes something like this. Like a wildfire, humanity surged ever onwards, changing the stars unchecked, until humanity came upon a Murai hive world. Cleansing the planet of its inhabitants in a corporate-backed military action dubbed Cloudfall, humanity declared war on the insectoid spacefarers, expecting to crush them like bugs. Humanity lost the war. So if this is something that appeals to you, then check out Change Stars, a sci-fi TTRPG. Next up, we have the Prophecy of Nine Omens trilogy. This is a book with 3 classical fantasy RPG adventures for 5th edition D&D. The Prophecy of Nine Omens has foretold that 3 legendary orb stones will cause death and destruction throughout Eastern Faraway. The orb stones must be destroyed to prevent the prophecy and stop the cataclysm. You have to cunningly steal the orbs from a heavily protected vault and transport them across the sea to the secret location of the sunken city of Siren Home. So with this, you'll get a book with the following adventures and a compendium. You'll get 3 classic adventures, which is about 160 pages of content, the Brave Adventurer's Guide with all unlocked stretch goals, and includes free virtual tabletop tokens, gridless maps and digital handouts. That's the Prophecy of Nine Omens trilogy. Next up we have Courts of Blades, the tabletop RPG of power, politics, gunpowder, diplomacy, Renaissance magic and romantic skullduggery. Court of Blades takes place in the vibrant fantasy Renaissance city-state of Illyrian, in a world populated by scheming nobles, court magicians and dashing duelists. As a noble retainer, you will engage in the polite civil warfare of the great families. You will host lavish balls and manipulate the courts, uncover the plots of your rivals, protect the city from arcane dangers, manage your own intrigues and personal scandals, leverage your reputations, connections and so much more. So Court of Blades is built on the bones of John Harper's Forged in the Dark system, and it's a fiction first D6 dice pool game, and it is built for campaign length play. That is Court of Blades. Next up, let's get up to some 3D printable terrain. We've got Ghastly Graves, a 3D printable graveyard. And for this, backing this, you get a set of STL files allowing you to build your own Gothic themed gardens. Files have been scaled for 28mm miniatures, but as with all 3D printable files, you have ability to scale them up. And you have got such things as headstones, monuments, gravestones, sarcophagi, open grave, fence, a pathway, a catacomb entrance, workshed, and mausoleum. And if you look on their Kickstarter page, you'll see some nice pictures of all of those products. Then we have got the Fanzine Trip Issue 1, a fanzine for the players of the Fantasy Trip. This is an unofficial magazine for Steve Jackson's The Fantasy Strip role-playing game. The first issue contains a 48-page black and white publication with colour covers and features new scenarios, locations, and even print-and-play gaming aids, counters, and character cards. It's got additional rules that introduce pulp science fiction rocketry to the campaign, an adventure that has your party searching a vast, dangerous swampland for a magical artifact, and all such goodness as that. So check that one out. That is the Fanzine Trip Issue 1. Okay, back to 5e. Yes, there's lots of 5e products on Kickstarter. This is Battle Masters and Berserkers, a D&D 5e class expansion. It builds itself as a killer compendium of character options, magic items, gear, archetypes, paths, feats, and more for 5e fighters and barbarians. It presents a wide variety of character options for fighters and barbarians, including new archetypes, backgrounds, paths, etc. In the 72-page book, you've got 14 martial archetypes and barbarian paths, 10 new backgrounds, 35 feats for offense and defense, 45 new alternate class features and rage powers, 45 new weapons, and 24 new magic items. Back to 3D printing, and this one is Dangerous Monsters 3D printable STL files. These are 32mm scale minis for tabletop role-playing games, and it's got 20 miniatures of 32mm scale. And if you have a look on the website and you've got a look on the Kickstarter for this one, they've got some really nice miniatures on here. And I can't sort of describe them, but they are really nicely done. If the STL images are anything to go by, some really unique creatures here. So things like the hippogriff, the bullet, the cockatrice, really nice looking minis. So the one I like is the poisonous snail with sort of like tentacle eyes, pods. So really check that one out if you want STL files. There's some nice looking images on that one. Next up, we have 24 by 36 double-sided vinyl battle mats with wet erase surface. This is a modern and fantasy collection with more than 30 mat choices. The vinyl maps are printed on 16-ounce vinyl with 300 dpi resolutions, so they will not tear, crease or shrink like paper or other material would do. It's got scale grids, and with grid and gridless maps, and the grids are 1 square to the 1 inch. They are wet erasable, and you can use any non-permanent pens on them. They claim to be waterproof and liquid resistant, and they've got some nice maps here. And again, check out either the YouTube video for this or the Kickstarter page to see some of the lovely maps they've got. You have to order a minimum of 2 double-edged maps because of the shipping costs. That's the only proviso. But they are also offering custom maps. So if you have your own design map for $15, you can have that printed out as one of their products just for yourself. So that is 24 by 36 double-sided vinyl battle mats with wet erase surface. Now on to the next one. We have Fantasy World. It's the new go-to RPG for Powered by the Apocalypse fantasy adventuring. Powered by the Apocalypse game, it's a love letter and a critique of a classic design and a new kid on the block that tries to add polish and accessibility to the PBTA framework by standing on the shoulders of giants. It claims that it has demystified the Powered by the Apocalypse rules. World building has been made easy using moves and reactions. Each protagonist has built-in mechanics that produce an emergent character arc. An inclusive and fresh way to express the physical and cultural uniqueness of each character in the game. Combat is sudden, brutal and dynamic, and on the website or the Kickstarter there is a link to the wiki with all the rules already up there, and on their itch page they've got some three articles on the core difference between Fantasy World and Dungeon World, which is another PBTA fantasy game. Next up we have Modern 5e Core Rulebook, a 5th edition RPG rule set for modern action adventure. And like others, this one uses the 5e System Reference Document, or SRD, to create a rule set for modern action adventures. The sandbox allows game masters to run modern campaigns amid any contemporary setting. You may be aware that there have been other modern versions of 5e before, so what sets Modern 5e apart from the other modern editions? Well, this is its compatibility with the parent 5e rule set. They have specifically retained all 5e rules and avoided making any proprietary changes to the game. Their primary goal is to leave the current 5th edition mechanics intact and instead adopt and extend the current 5e rule set to Modern 5e, making the hybrid system entirely backward compatible with 5th edition. And finally, for the new releases, but by no means least, is Legacy of the Soul Flame, an epic, noble, dark role-playing game campaign setting of undead, snow and ice, exploration and blood ties. It is a noble, dark role-playing game campaign setting of undead, snow and ice. Explore a vast continent of stark beauty filled with detail and lore. Use the magic of your birthright, your soul flame, to combat the undead that riddle the lands and that humanity barely holds in check. Dig beneath the snow and ice to find remnants of a lost technical age and determine what happened to the elves and the fae. It is a D6 game based game system introduced in the other game Astuli and has been reworked from the ground up for Legacy Soul of the Flame. It claims if this doesn't suit your gaming group, the entire setting has been written in sufficient detail that it can be exported to other game systems. And for this you get a 420-page hardback rulebook. So that is the new Kickstarters that have released in the last 7 days. So next up, let's have a look at what is ending soon. So first up we have Crimson Chains, which is SCP Horror for 5e, a 5th edition fantasy campaign of cosmic horror versus the Scarlet King. The Scarlet King is a primordial force formed as the manifestation of the strain between the current age and the former, and fury it created. It is perhaps the most dangerous and powerful of all SCP energies, and featuring this horrifying villain as a central antagonist of a 5th edition fantasy tabletop adventure, and is both thrilling and terrifying. For those that don't know, the SCP Foundation, this is a fictional secret organization entrusted by governments around the globe to contain and study anomalous individuals, entities, locations, objects and phenomena operating outside the bounds of natural law. And if you've not heard of it before, the SCP is a web-based collaborative fiction project which you can find over at their website scpwiki.com, where people put up fictional stories that fit in with this genre, often with redacted stuff so that there's bits missing. So this ties into that website quite nicely and uses that for inspiration. Also ending soon is Sin, a Spire RPG sourcebook, Crime, Punishment and Encountering Gods in a Mile High Cursed City. So this is the second full-length sourcebook for the Spire role-playing game. In Spire, a mile-high city riddled with betrayal and inequality, the ministry of our hidden mistress fights with dagger and shadow against the cruel high elf overlords, waging a hidden war of sabotage, insurrection and assassination. and this book, it concentrates on crime, order and religion. It has 2 new classes for Spire and 3 full-length adventures. So if you've got Spire, then definitely check this one out. Next up, we have Affinity, 3 sci-fi fantasy campaign settings for 5e. It's got 600 plus pages of races, classes, weapons, armor, magics and monsters within 3 interconnected worlds from the creators of Ultra Modern 5. And it's got a plethora of stretch goals, and if you're interested in this subject, then check out the webpage. It's got a bit of steampunk in there, occult magic. That's Affinity, so have a look at that one. Next up is 100 plus tabletop maps for Dungeons and Dragons or any RPG. It's a collection of maps for tabletop RPGs usable on a variety of virtual tabletop platforms for D&D, 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 5e, Pathfinder, and the maps are printable. Some of these maps have multiple variations, and all of them include gridded and gridless variations. It covers many terrains and scenarios, some forests, some tree villages, and a complete old western town with individual interiors for your cowboy campaigns. Next we have We Die Young RPG, a supernatural role-playing in the 1990s. This is a spiritual sequel to Dark Places and Demogorgons set in Seattle at the beginning of the grunge counterculture movement. This is you play as 20-something humans, vampires, werebeasts, mummies, fae and fairies, and multiple other types of supernatural creatures and character classes set in the 1990s Seattle during the grunge and alternative music counterculture movements. And this uses the Survive This rules, which is a tabletop RPG system that is used in a lot of the bloke games. It's D20 based and is OSR influenced. Also ending soon is Talaman Saber Terrain, 3D printable hex terrain and STL files. And it's got these are 3D tiles for 3D printing in STL format. The people here worked for Modifius, Mantic, Soda Pop Miniatures, IDW and Reaper, so they have got a lot of experience with doing 3D STL files. And they say that we love old fantasy flicks, and we found ourselves watching Jason and the Argonauts, and then an idea popped into our heads. Bollocks. Got this bit. Next up is Talaman Saber Terrain, 3D printable hex terrain STL files. These are stunning detail and variety, open lock connectivity, compatible with Gloomhaven and other base games. And this is an outdoor themed terrain set. They've got some pictures on their website. They've got 3 themes available: dungeon, outdoor and cave. And you get the STL files. The hexes all interlock together. They've got walls and columns, so you can build all of these exteriors once you've printed them out. Next up is Mythic Gargantuan Creatures STLs for printing. This is 3D STL files for 3D printing. Now the people on this worked for Modifius, Mantic, Soda Pop Miniatures, IDW and Reaper, so they've got quite a bit of experience in the miniature field and printing, making STL files. So they love old fantasy flicks and found themselves watching Jason and the Argonauts recently, and then that idea popped into their heads. What if we do really gigantic models of these monsters from the old fantasy and sword movies? I think there would be a lot of people eager to print giant monsters for their 3D printers, so they say. So these miniatures really are gigantuan. They are 100 millimeters in size, and we have got a Cyclops, a Hydra, Talus, Jotun, the Shadow, Kali, and you need to have a look at these miniatures on the Kickstarter page to really get an idea of the size of these and of the detail. Okay, next up we have got Blue Planet Recontact, a new and an updated edition of the classic science fiction role-playing game set on the wild frontier world of Poseidon. This is the third edition of the Blue Planet role-playing game, and it includes a free 80-page recontract primer to see the rules with full colour maps. The blurb for this one is a compelling RPG journey into humanity's precarious future on a distant water world, where political unrest and a hungry alien ecology threaten the nascent colony effort. A planet where geomarshals struggle to maintain peace, incorporate mercenaries wage amphibious proxy wars, and native insurgents fight for their adopted world. A frontier where human desperation and corporate greed ravage an uncanny ecology, threatening to plunge humanity into a war of survival with an ancient alien legacy. Right, next one up we've got is Into the Feywild, Fey Critters for D&D 5e, a book of Fey-themed critters and a fantasy adventure in the Feywild for D&D 5e. This has got a complete adventure in the Feywild, 4 fantastical new monsters, a handful of fearsome creatures, and a bunch of new Fey beasts. This 33-page booklet contains 18 new Fey-themed critters ranging from CR0 to CR11. Then we have got Academies of the Arcane, a new RPG book with rules to make magical schools, their houses and professors, including 90 new spells and 36 new backgrounds, and this is designed for the Troika system. Which, if you don't know Troika is a successful indie RPG which is based on the old fighting fantasy novels and can be adapted for other systems. It includes 36 new student character backgrounds, as many as the core Troika book, 90 new spells befitting a wizarding academy, 20 plus enormous tables for generating school uniforms, school houses, teachers, locations, events, classes and more, 50 pieces of original art, and yes, you were right, this is streaming out Hogwarts. So if you like Troika, then check out Academies of the Arcane. Then we have got Fantasy City Sights and Scenes 3 for use with fantasy RPGs. This is by the very productive Philip Reed and is a guide for game masters, including 16 different fantasy locations, city locations, each ready to drop into your campaign. And as I said, this is part 3. There are 2 books previous to this. It's got 48 pages with city scenes and city sights. So if you've already got the previous 2 versions, 2 parts of this, then you probably want to check out part 3 as well. And the final one ending this week on the list, but again by no means least, is Ruins of Symborium for 5e. This is the acclaimed dark fantasy world of Symborium, adapted for 5e, introducing custom rules, origins, classes, creatures and more. So it's Symborium, for those that don't know, is a fantasy tabletop RPG that was often described as dark, gritty and deadly, and was released in Sweden in the Swedish language in 2014, and then translated into English for a worldwide release in 2016 and released by Free League. The original Symborium rules set is a D20 roll under system with fully player facing, and was designed to be quick, punishing and easy to get into. And now they've done a 5e version. For those who are not aware of the Symborium setting, it is described as it revolves around the Ambrians, a civilization that 2 decades ago were forced to flee their ancestral soil after a devastating war. Their new and promised land borders on the vast forest of Davokar, covering the remnants of the Empire of Symborium, which fell into ruins hundreds of years ago. Brimming with natural resources and mythical treasures, the forest calls out to the Ambrians to be explored and exploited, but the road into depths lay far from open. Not only are the shadowy halls beneath the foliage fraught with danger, monsters and infectious corruption, there are also the elves of the Iron Pact who have vowed to die to keep anyone from disturbing the ruins of old, warning that the ancient evil of Symborum stirs in its sleep. The horrors of Davokar are about to awaken. And I know people were surprised with the 5e version of this, but I was listening to a podcast the other day with the author, and he said that when they originally did Symborum and were designing the system for it, they always intended to do a 5e version. So this Kickstarter has allowed them to do that. It's got new classes for 5e and has got a game master's guide and a player's handbook. So that is the final one for today's show. Thank you all for listening. Check out Kickstarter, check out all these Kickstarters that interest you. And that's all for this episode. Until I see you for next week, I'll see you all on the flip side. You've been listening to the Dragons Are Real podcast. For more information, check out the website at pjones.neocities.org. The blog is dragonsarerealpodcast.tumblr.com. We are also on YouTube, Facebook and other platforms. If you want to get in touch, you can send me a voicemail via the Anchor app at anchor.fm/dragonsarereal, or you can send me an email at dragonsarerealpodcast@pm.me.